Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another session of Food for Mzansi's hashtag Gather to Grow here on Twitter Spaces. I see my speakers are here, ready to get the show on the road. I think I'll just give it a minute or two for people to join. I'm going to ask my speakers who are already present to tell us a little bit about themselves, where their journey started in agriculture is always so interesting to get people's story about how they're connected to agriculture. And it's absolutely amazing just to hear that as we start and kick off tonight's discussion. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask Professor Samson Mawali, the Director for the Center of Renewable and Sustainable Energy Studies at Stellenbosch University, just to unmute his mic and tell us a bit about himself, where it all started for him in agriculture, as a start to this really exciting conversation. And then also, I forgot to mention the topic. It's about alternative energy and the belief that farmers may actually hold the golden ticket. Professor, over to you.
Evening, colleagues, and evening to all the attendees. I'm Samson Mampieli. I'm the Director at the Center for Renewable and Sustainable Energy Studies at Stellenbosch University. I'm also a professor in the Department of Process Engineering. My primary area of specialization is bioenergy, and then my secondary area of specialization is solar energy. So I've done quite some projects in solar energy. I do a lot of work in the bioenergy space, biodigesters, and things such as pyrolysis and gasification. I'm also coordinating a lot of research activities because I'm running the National Department of Science and Innovations program called the Hub and Spokes program in the Renewable and Sustainable Energy Studies. With that program, we run basically national and international research programs on behalf of the department. We run flagship programs. For instance, I'm the leader of the hydrogen research in the country in terms of the RDI, operationalization of the Hydrogen Society Roadmap. So I'm leading the research initiatives there. I'm also leading the establishment of the National Solar Research Center, which is a big center that will be having infrastructure going up to megawatt scale. I understand mainly the renewable and sustainable energy space. I'm not involved in farming at the moment, but I understand what renewable and sustainable energy technologies can be implemented in the farming sector, as well as what farmers can do in order to implement these kind of projects and systems.
Thanks, Professor. And you surely wear many hats, and I'm so honored to have you here as a speaker tonight, sharing all of the knowledge that you have and all the options that you can maybe suggest that's available for farmers when it comes to alternative energy and getting off the grid, because I think we all have to deal with the reality of load shedding and the scarcity of our energy supply. So I definitely thank you for being here. Next up, I have Jason Gifford. I hope I'm saying your surname correctly. You've spent the better part of the 15 years, developing biogas to energy and technology, energy solutions and technology. And you're a director of two companies, which is Logical Waste and Logical Water. Welcome to Gather to Grow, Jason. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Dawn, and good evening to everybody that's joined us. I've been in this space for a number of years now with a keen interest in biogas as a energy and nutrient solution in the agricultural space. We've implemented a number of projects over the years in that area, normally on the larger scale. More recently, we've been approached and been asked to develop some smaller scale solutions where farm agricultural residues, manures and the like can be used to produce gas on farm, in some instances just for heating applications, and in other instances for right the way through to power generation with heat recovery.
Thank you so much, Jason. And it's also great to have you with us. And I think it's also vital because a lot of the listeners that joins us on this platform is, new startup farmers that's just entering the sector. And I think your expertise and knowledge will definitely be valued, in terms of sharing that information with them. So thank you so much for being here. Then we have Namalikulunga. Namalikulunga is a Netafim technical advisor, and he's based in Zambia. So I'm really happy to have him with us. Guys, I hijacked him. I was actually interviewing him for our Farmers Inside Track podcast, and I was like, listen, your expertise are needed in this specific session that I'm hosting on Gather to Grow. And he made time to talk to us. So Nambwale, thank you so much for being here, and I welcome you.
Thank you so much, John, and welcome to our listeners. It's indeed an honor to be part of this discussion this evening. So I'm Nambwale Kalunga, the technical advisor for NetFM here in Zambia. Been in the irrigation industry now for 13 years to be specific. So my focus is actually irrigation and water management. So I've got a lot of background on farming as well. So with farming and irrigation and water management combined together, that's what I bring forth on the table. Looking forward to seeing how we can then help our farmers to make sure that they can grow more with less as we do it with NetFM.
Thank you so much, Namwale. And I think it's such an important aspect also to incorporate into the conversation. So thank you so much for being here and for joining us this evening. Now, during my interactions and responses from farmers on hashtag Gather to Grow a week ago, where we were discussing the impact of load shedding, precautions, and tips for farmers, one message was clear, that it's vital for the industry to have steady, reliable, and cost-effective sources of energy. But where are we as a country? We have rolling blackouts, which is a norm. But I kind of want to just start off by understanding what our status is and if our speakers agree or disagree and that when it comes to alternative energy, that farmers may actually hold the golden ticket. Professor, I'd like to maybe start with you, and then I'll also ask my other two speakers to also respond to this question.
Yes, energy farming is the way to go in South Africa because farmers hold the land. They've got large tracts of land. Some of it is located in areas with the very great resources in terms of wind, solar, as well as some of the resources that you normally find in the farms, such as your bioenergy. It's quite easier for farmers to implement or to assist in the implementation of renewable and sustainable energy projects. The REAP program, for instance, in South Africa, the one that's implemented by the National Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, it's basically being done through farms. So developers approach farmers for land, and then they rent their land to develop these large wind farms and large solar systems for the REAP program that end up feeding into the national grid. The other issue is in terms of small-scale systems that the farmers themselves can use. It's quite easy for them to develop off-grid systems using solar energy and small-scale wind turbines. There's also an opportunity to develop biogas digesters for both heat and electricity generation, depending on the amount or the quantity of bioenergy or animal waste that they have. I've visited a village, for instance, in Germany. To us, it's a small town, but to them, it's a village that's being powered 100% of renewable energy. And what they do there, they have a big biogas digester that they collect the waste from the farmers in the area, and then they feed that biodigester, and then they produce enough gas to run two big engines. And coupled to that, they've got some wind turbines in the area. They've got some solar energy in the roofs as well. So you could have a combination of renewable energy technologies and systems that you can run either off the grid or that could work with the grid. So in that kind of a situation, they have what we call a mini grid for themselves that they provide power to themselves, to their own houses. There's quite a lot of opportunities for farmers, like I said, to rent their farms out for renewable energy. And the good thing is that even if you rent out your farm, you can still continue with various farming activities. The farm can still be in production after the installation of big renewable energy systems.
Thanks, Professor. Much appreciated. And thanks for just setting the scene. Jason, maybe you can also just share your insights with the work that you're currently doing or have done in the past few years, specifically with smaller farms and people who's just starting out in the industry. What is your experience, and do farmers hold the golden ticket?
In my mind, it's a very exciting space. There's one vital component that's missing, which would unlock an enormous potential within South Africa, within the region, which is an access to market on the energy side. So Samson mentioned about the REAP program and farmers being able to rent out land to developers and so on. But that's on a very, very large scale side of things. On a smaller scale, on farm size, we can unpack it into two basic sizes. One would be almost like a micro scale, a relatively small farming operation, which is packaging produce for market or sending produce to market. And for them, the significant benefit of putting in a simple anaerobic system, anaerobic digester-based system, would be the recycling of nutrients. So nitrate today, the cost of chemical fertilizer has pretty much quadrupled over the last couple of years. And the cost of nitrate is directly related to the cost of oil. So as oil goes up, the cost of nitrogen fertilizers go up. And that's an international commodity. So one of the ways to address that at farm level is to recycle nutrient. Take offcuts, take produce that cannot be sold, whether it be damaged through handling or through insects or whatever the case may be, and ferment that, recover the nutrient and apply that back to land. It will reduce your inputs. The gas being produced from a small system may then displace LPG that is used for cooking in the house or for heating water at a household level. As the systems get bigger, as the access to biomass gets larger, so let's say on a chicken farm, possibly a piggery and a dairy, a house dairy or open field dairy, then your options with the utilization of the biomass and the amount of gas that you produce starts to change. So at a very small scale, doing power generation, generally speaking, is not feasible. But at a larger scale, it is feasible. Where the access to market becomes important is once you are producing more energy than you can use. And let me use a dairy as an example. Typically, a dairy would have the ability to generate more power than it requires. So in that situation, the potential in the agricultural sector to help to alleviate our situation that we find ourselves in, where there's a lack of power, we have rolling blackouts on a daily basis, just by allowing farms to sell excess power back to the grid through a regulated framework would go a long way in addressing the shortfalls in electricity. The beautiful thing about anaerobic digestion is that on a farm-based system, typically you have inbuilt gas storage. So gas is available for use on demand, and larger systems could get an instruction from the utility to generate as and when the utility requires. And by unlocking that potential, it goes a long way in addressing some of the energy crisis that we find ourselves in now. And it also goes a long way in stabilizing farmers' ability to generate income and keep farming. Farming is an incredibly difficult thing at the best of times. I'm not a farmer and I wouldn't go near it with a barge pole. I think it's incredibly difficult. But being able to get a second income from products that are produced on the farm, which currently have very low or no value at all, or in some cases are an expense to the farm in terms of handling manure and so on, that would really change the dynamic that we find ourselves in now.
Thank you so much, Jason, and I hope to maybe get into some of the more practical steps that farmers would take as we carry on with the conversation. But first, before I answer my next question, Namwale, just in terms of your take on whether farmers kind of hold the golden ticket, especially within the irrigation space and the space that you work in at the moment, just a short, response to the question.
My answer definitely would be yes. Farmers really hold that golden ticket, especially in the space of irrigation, to be specific. I'll give you just a case of one farmer up in the northwestern province of the country, Zambia. He's currently farming pineapples on his farm. What he's done is, because he's got a stream that is running all year round, that is just by the edge of the farm. So what he's done is he's set up a mini hydropower plant there. Now, that mini hydropower plant is currently generating about 850 kilowatts of power. So part of that energy that he's actually generating, he's actually using it to supply his irrigation system. In this case, he's actually using a center pivot. That's what he's using. The remaining power, he's managed to actually sell it out to a local community. The local community there that never saw power in its area is now being powered by the same power that is actually coming from the mini hydropower plant that this farmer has actually set up. And again, he's also pushing part of it into the grid, which is something that is very interesting, because then you look at the dynamics in as much as you want to just use it for the purpose of, let's say, irrigation in this case. But the excess of it, and I'm just going to pick a leaf on what Jason was actually mentioning, the excess of it, which you definitely are not going to be using, it's an opportunity to actually gain an income on it when you actually push it to the national grid. With so many examples, farmers can actually pick a lot. I heard Jason mention the biogas story. It's also a leaf that farmers can actually use in a quest to actually actualize their farming in this case.
Okay, so one message is clear from all of my speakers is that it is possible, and farmers actually do hold the golden ticket when it comes to alternative energy and diversifying in that way, that they can actually push more energy into the grid as well. Now, in an article published by New Southern Energy about renewable and sustainable energy in South Africa and its impact on agriculture, it stated that although SA lags behind other countries when it comes to renewable energy, studies, however, suggest that while 17% of the energy will come from renewable sources by 2030, 40% of energy in South Africa will be sustainable. Now, do you agree with this? And is it possible for Mzansi to overtake many countries and exceed the global average in just over a decade? Professor, you'd like to take this one, and then I'll also ask other speakers to also respond to it.
It's not a straightforward yes. So if we look at South Africa, our situation, we have the country's plan, which is the integrated resource plan, that calls for about 32% renewable energy contribution by 2030. We are implementing the integrated resource plan and looking at bigger kind of renewable energy program, the REAP program. I don't think through the implementation of the energy plan only we can get to those targets. However, government has opened up space, and I think the integrated resource plan is now outdated, looking at the various interventions that government has introduced. For instance, we are now allowed to generate up to 100 megawatts without a generation license, and when you register your project with NERSA, you don't necessarily need a power purchase agreement. We've started seeing some megawatts being registered with NERSA on that kind of a program. Eskom has streamlined the wheeling and banking and offset arrangements. So there is a standard kind of practice that we all need to follow when we want to do the wheeling, banking, and offset. We are seeing a lot more shopping malls and establishments like that taking advantage of especially the banking and offset kind of arrangements and putting solar panels on top of the roof. And in the agriculture sector, going back to things such as your warehousing, such as your pack houses, that's where things such as your offset can come in. We are anticipating that with the opening up of the grid, we will have a lot more renewable and sustainable energy coming on board. And over and above what government is doing through the bigger REAP program, we will have a lot more renewable energy penetration into the network. And also we'll have a lot of distributed generation systems in the near future, and farmers will play a key role in that. It's not a very straightforward answer, but what I can say is that we see the future grid being more distributed. We see a lot more renewable energy coming on board. The price of battery storage systems, for instance, is also going down, which then makes the installation of things such as solar panels with battery systems more attractive. The price of technologies, renewable energy technologies, are also going down. I follow the prices from the International Energy Agency and IRENA, and I've noticed that the price of technologies is going down. Back home here, even with the REAP program, the prices of technologies has been going down. So yes, we see more and more people are going to be using renewable energy or renewable and sustainable energy in the near future.
Thanks, Professor Sampson. Jason or Namwale, would you like to respond to this question? Maybe just to share some of your insights. Otherwise, I can move on to my next question. Just to unmute your mic.
Just maybe a suggestion. Okay, can I just put a perspective, like for a country like Zambia, which, for a very long time now, our generating capacity has always come from renewable energy. I think we use almost close to 95% of our energy here in Zambia coming from renewable energy. And we still have more developments that are coming in through renewable energy. And this is what the government has actually tried to push from their side to make sure that we stick to the energy that has kept us where we are as a country, and so invest more into it as well. So like currently where we are sitting in terms of the energy capacities, we are looking at actually pushing more of that with the vast water resource that we have. something that is actually even very interesting. Like for Zambia, a country like Zambia actually holds almost close to over 40% of the waters that are in the southern region actually found in a country like Zambia. So that makes it actually a possibility to push the agenda of renewable energy.
Thanks, Namwale. Jason, maybe your take on this? Otherwise, I can move on to the next question.
Yeah, just a couple of sort of takeaways from that. I think there's two different levels to that statement. And, one is at a sort of national level and sort of goal setting and objectives to be achieved. And as Samson mentioned, with the energy plan, the roadmap, and so on and so forth. That's all fine and well, but practically for a farmer who is trying to milk his herd and there's no power, it means nothing. It doesn't help anybody. The reality is for the next at least 10 years, in order to remain competitive, in order to remain in business, you have to take your energy security into your own hands, whether that be purely a solar system or some form of hybrid of technologies, whether it be wind and solar and biomass. It's immaterial. But unless commercial operations have the ability to continue operating as the grid continues to fail and the provision of electricity continues to get worse, farmers are going to go out of business. So it's one thing to have targets and ambitions, which is great. But, for example, the REAP is only interested in 10 megawatts and greater, and the small-scale REAP has been stalled for years. And the small-scale REAP only looks at 1 megawatt and greater. So the reality is most farms, commercial farms, hold the key to energy from biomass, and most of those solutions are between 100 and 250 kilowatt. There are literally thousands of opportunities available in the country, but there is no market for them. So the first step is farms to utilize what they've got, secure their own energy so that they can continue operating. And then as the grid starts to open up, as more private power is welcomed into the system, then the opportunity will start to flow for those farms to start exporting power.
Thanks, Jason. And I think you've actually answered my next question in terms of the type of practices that farmers can start adopting, because in other parts of the world, farmers are incorporating energy-saving methods by improving tractor and field operation efficiency, improving machinery maintenance, updating dairy cooling and heating equipment, and also using more efficient, motors, fans, and lighting. What are some of the other methods that farmers can sort of start implementing? Say, for instance, someone listening right now, if they can go out tomorrow and think about something that they can buy to, change the way they operate, what can that be practically? Jason, Namwale, maybe you guys can take this question in your experience working with farmers on the ground. And I think Namwale made a perfect example in our discussion earlier as well.
One of the most obvious is keeping soils in a healthy state. So regardless of what your farming activity is, putting nutrient back into an organic nutrient back into the soil is an absolute must. The beauty of chemical fertilizer is that the result is instantaneous. The beauty of biological nutrient is that it's long-term and sustainable. So there is a transition period, and it's not to say that you can't do one without the other. But in order to really see the benefits from putting organic nutrient back into the soil, you're looking at a 3 to 5 year process before you start seeing those returns on that investment. So a country like in South Africa, very different to Zambia in terms of water, but South Africa is a very, very dry country. By adding carbon to the soil, you improve the soil's ability to retain water. Here, locally, where we swing between the drought and too much rain and flooding, putting carbon back into soil starts to stabilize the soil, starts to enable soils to hold nutrient, brings the microbial activity back into the soil. And over time, your inputs start to reduce. Your chemical inputs start to reduce going into the soil. Healthier soils, better crops, less water required, and so on. So, starting with a very, very basic system on farm, which can be just composting in the beginning. It could be a small anaerobic system, which can be as simple as a couple of plastic barrels. It could be a legume-based system, could be a bag-based system, whatever it is. But just starting with that approach, recycling nutrient on farm has to be one of the simplest ways to achieving sustainable farming.
Thanks so much, Jason. Professor, maybe your take on this one?
If you talk about immediate solutions that farmers can bring on board, I immediately think of things such as your small-scale biodigesters that the previous speaker mentioned. When you start to talk about things such as small-scale embedded generation, then the local municipality bylaws or regulations kick in, which makes life a little bit difficult. So government needs to finalize regulations along those lines. But I agree that for farmers who are struggling with things such as the power cuts, the load shedding, for them to keep producing and also to keep their produce in cold storages, things such as solar PV on their roofs become an immediate kind of solution. In terms of cold storage facilities, you can easily do that with your solar PV. You can also do it with gas. We are looking at cold storage facilities that you can use biogas, for instance. It's something that has been there in the past. It has not been very efficient, so research is going on that. But the immediate solutions become the small-scale kind of thing. Your wind turbines, we don't look at big wind turbines. We look at kilowatt-scale turbines, up to 200 kilowatt kind of turbines that weren't as expensive as the big turbines. You can also do these kind of systems connected in modules, in parallel and in series, buying smaller ones and then connecting them to make kind of medium-scale kind of systems. So there are immediate kind of solutions. If you look at the farming activities where you're doing things such as your dairy, in some of the structures, you can put solar PV on top of the roof structures that you have. And then you can have solar PV, you can have electricity from solar PV, and then you can direct your waste that's coming from your milking houses and ensure that all that waste goes into the digester. You carry a cost that you are already carrying, but then you get some benefits in the form of biogas that will come from there. And obviously, you will get additional benefits in terms of soil conditioning and nutrients recycling and things like that.
Thanks, Professor. I think we're getting a lot of very practical advice and tips from our speakers. I want to maybe get into the cost involved to set up these systems. But before I do that, I also understand that, reducing or eliminating tillage, for example, converting to grass-based livestock operation, or even switching to micro-irrigation can also lead to, big energy and financial savings. Now, Mwale, maybe I can get you to just come and contribute in terms of the irrigation aspects and for farmers, to be more sustainable and more efficient when it comes to saving energy as a start to that conversation. And then I'd also like to just talk about more of the costs involved. I see we have one of our listeners also wanting to contribute. So maybe first Nambole, and then Tsohang, I'll give you a chance to speak as well.
From our point of view, we would look at what we call precision irrigation, and it's where we'll be looking at applying water at the right time at the right place, and also your conveyance in terms of your nutrients, in this case, to that particular crop that you would be actually planting. Now, in all this, you also need to understand what would be the crop's water requirements. At what particular time would you want actually to give that water to? What we've discovered in all our researches that we've done is that with the specific water requirements that each particular crop then requires, you can actually give it in the quantities that it requires at that particular time. Now, that brings me back to then in terms of your energy savings then. So you would have a farmer that probably is off-grid and is using a system like, let's say, solar. And if you look at the number of hours that this farmer only has during the day to be able to actually provide this much needed water and nutrients to that particular crop. So you would actually then be restricted to that particular period of time in terms of irrigating. In as much as he's got that limited time, he's going to be applying the sufficient required water to that particular crop. With your energy savings in this case, of course, if you are using solar, you definitely reap the benefit of actually on your energy cost, because it's a natural energy that you just get from the sun. And so your irrigation in this case will practically be less. Your cost on that irrigation system in terms of your energy cost would drastically reduce in this case. So with such practical alternatives on what energy you can provide to your irrigation system, this can actually benefit the farmer more. And this is what we try and encourage the farmers to say, look, you can be off-grid, but that doesn't deter you from actually continuing with your farming. So you can come in with other alternative sources of energy to be able to actually tap in and do your farming from that point.
Thanks, Nambole. Tsohang, requested to become a speaker. Would you like to contribute, ask a question? I hope I'm saying your name correctly.
Greetings. I have a question. I would like to find out if it is possible that with a biodigester. Is it possible that I can use the gas to be converted into electricity? And if so, what is the name of the equipment that I need for that? Because currently I only see the uses of it being gas, like for your heaters, your cooking, and so forth.
Thanks so much. Jason, would you maybe like to take this one?
Thanks for the question. It's possible, even from a very small amount of gas produced, to generate electricity. You can get a very small, very similar to the petrol generators that you see a lot of businesses running and a lot of households running when we have load shedding. You can run a similar type of generator on gas. So it is viable from a very small volume of gas. In the case of a chicken farm, if I use the example of a broiler house requires heating. So during certain times of the year, and depending on the nature of the broiler house, if it's a climate-controlled broiler house or if it's open, would determine how much heating is required and how much electricity is required. So a fully automated climate-controlled house that's maybe 120 meters long or thereabouts, that will require somewhere around 60 kilowatt hours a day, give or take, to run the system, which includes the fans and the curtains opening and closing and cooling pads and so on. That's on one side. On the other side, if it's a smaller broiler house with open sides, maybe only requires heating in summer, doesn't have any forced ventilation, then in that situation, the gas could be used just instead of, say, charcoal or instead of paraffin or something like that. The broiler house on a 6-week cycle, you would be able to take the manure out, put it into a digester, produce gas on a continual basis, and use that for power generation with some form of heat recovery, or just for heating, or just for power. So there are a number of options. What it comes down to is how many birds do you have at this point in time, and what rotation you're on, and how many houses you have. And then from that, you would be able to build up a system to meet your requirements. Bear in mind that you may not be able to meet 100% of your electrical requirements, and in which case then you would look at when is electricity the most valuable for you. So for example, if you're in an area that has a time of use electricity tariff, so in other words, your cost of electricity changes at different times of the day and different days of the week, you would then want to generate your electricity at the most expensive times. So your most expensive times are in the morning and in the evening, and then during the course of the day. So you'd want to maximize your earning or your savings potential by generating your own electricity when it's the most expensive to buy it. So there are a lot of solutions. Just bear in mind, and one thing is very important, biogas, as is produced from the digester, is a raw fuel. So it's got contaminants in it. So in order to use that gas for a long period of time in a cost-effective and sustainable manner, you must clean that gas. There are different ways to clean the gas, and I won't go into all the details about it, but suffice to say, you need to take out the water from the gas, and you need to take out the impurities that will cause corrosion in your equipment downstream. Quite simple to do, but like most things, once you know how to do it, it's easy.
Thanks, Jason, and I hope that answers your question, Sohang, and thank you so much for contributing. I must say I want to thank my speakers for being here. I'm really gaining so much knowledge on this topic. I'm really grateful for them also just joining and contributing what they know about this specific alternative energy and everything that farmers should know as well. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Let's unpack the technology that is available. I think we've made mention of it, but just to list it and also just to maybe be specific about the cost that's involved. Professor, can I maybe have you start us out, and then maybe each of our speakers can then focus on an area that they are an expert on. But just to kick off, exactly what the technology is that's available and some of the costs that farmers need to think about if they want to switch over.
I'm always wary of talking about a specific cost because the cost depends on a number of things. One of them is your needs in terms of what is it that you're doing and what is your electricity demand. And out of that electricity demand, which portion of the demand do you want to then cover? That then calls for a proper assessment, which then will tell you how much you will have to carry in terms of the cost. However, there are things such as your solar PV, which we know you can buy the solar panels for as low as 5 Rand per watt. If you are very lucky, you will get the solar panels for as low as 4 Rand per watt. But that's the cost of the solar panels themselves. It doesn't include the balance of the system, which is your mounting rack, your batteries, your inverters, and everything else. And the cost of inverters also, you're looking at about 10 to 15,000 Rand a 5 kilowatt inverter, which is a good size inverter in most cases when it comes to small scale embedded generation, but you still get your 4 kilowatt, 3 kilowatt, 2 kilowatt, and 1 kilowatt inverter, depending on your needs. And these inverters vary from the make all the way to capabilities. For instance, in some municipalities, they have a list of inverters that you can get online that are allowed to be used in those particular municipal areas. The city of Cape Town is one of them. If you are going to be feeding to the grid or to be connecting to the grid for that matter, because that inverter needs to have the capabilities to be able to curtail when or to stop feeding into the grid when the grid is down and only feed when the grid is live to protect whoever that could be working on the grid itself. In terms of costs, that's what I can say on the part of small-scale embedded generation or the solar PV side. The batteries are still quite expensive. You're looking at about between 4,000 and 5,000 rand per kilowatt hour of storage. If you're looking at the good batteries, such as your lithium-ion batteries, that will give you a lot of discharge cycles, or that will last you quite a long time, between 10 and 20 years. Again, it also varies depending on what your preferences could be. You can still go for lead-acid batteries and other type of batteries that will cost a lot more cheaper. That won't give you a lot of cycles in terms of charging and discharging. When it comes to things such as your biodigesters as well, it also goes back to your system sizing and the needs that you have. From a small scale digester that you can spend as low as 60,000, 70,000 and get a 3-4 cubic meter digester, maybe a 6 cubic meter digester. That's on the digester only, without the balance of the system, that such as your stoves, your whatever that you want to use, your cleaning, your purification system, for instance. And how far do you want to go in terms of purifying the gas? You may want to remove impurities such as CO2. Your cleaning will be a little bit more expensive. You may just want to remove some of the impurities that are not necessarily CO2, and then it can be cheaper. In terms of the wind energy systems, you can easily get a 4 kilowatt turbine for about 25,000 rands. But then again, you still need your batteries and you still need your inverter that comes with that. You still need the balance of the system in terms of where you're going to mount it and all those kind of things. So in short, it all boils down to getting the experts in the beginning who will advise you on the appropriate option to go for, and how much that option would cost then depends on your needs and how far you want to go in terms of covering those needs.
Thanks, Professor. I think that really gave us a good understanding of what farmers should budget for and what they should be thinking about when looking at alternative energy. Jason, my question to you would maybe be around how farmers can go about getting an expert, maybe like yourself, to come and do an assessment or come to the farm, visit the farm. Where should they be looking to? Who should they be contacting?
It's obviously me. No, we do a lot of work in the agricultural space in terms of evaluations and equipment supply and helping farmers develop systems. So our approach is a little bit different to typical equipment provider or a biogas plant builder, in that our approach is to work with the farmer and try and get the farmer to do as much of the work as they can. So, for example, when we do a lagoon-based system, we encourage the farmer to do the earthworks themselves and to get local contractors as far as possible that they're familiar with to come and do the work. Because if I contract, say, an earth-moving company on behalf of the farmer, I'll put a markup on it, whereas the farmer can just contract them direct and do it. So that is our approach to working in the agricultural sector. In terms of where to get information, there's obviously, our company is called Logical Waste. On our website, there's information there and our contact details. But there's a great repository of information for the biogas space, which is the South African Biogas Industry Association. Their website is sabia.org.za, and the website has a lot of information. It really does encourage people to become members of the organization for a number of reasons. One is it gives you access to a lot more information that is available only to members. In the public space, there's limited information, but members get access to the full trove of information. It also puts you in contact with other people in the biogas community. There's a lot of information that comes out of Sabia. It really does a lot of good work in that space. that's definitely well worth a visit. And if possible, it's not a big financial commitment. It's quite small for an individual to become a member, and then you get access to the newsletters and events and so on.
Thanks, Jason. And hopefully you get a few people to connect with you after this space. And of course, Namwale, just your take, especially as an irrigation expert, some of the costs involved to, get more efficient systems running on farms. And then I'd maybe also like to ask about maybe some of the bylaws that Professor Sampson was talking about briefly before we wrap up the discussion.
Hi, Don. In terms of costs on the different energy sources that farmers would definitely pick on, to really come up with an ideal cost to say this is exactly what is actually needed is something of a big hurdle. It's not something that we can actually just give there and then. But what we normally advise is that from the systems perspective, we would definitely be able to help you with coming up with what would be your requirement in terms of the system's flow on and how that system, how much water that system requires. And then it's from there that we can work back in terms of what would be your power requirement that is needed to actually be able to deliver that amount of water that we would actually advise you that we need. Whether you would go for solar, would definitely then advise you on exactly what would be your power ratings that solar system would need. If we'd go for, let's say, biogas or for bioenergy, there would also be recommendations that we would actually give from our side to be able to help you assign proper energy structure that would be able to help you run that irrigation system that we are going to recommend. And just also one thing that our audience needs to know is that we try by all means to design these systems to be as energy efficient as possible as they can, because we don't want to design something that would consume a lot of energy and then in the end it would push the cost on the farmer. So we try to design systems that would be energy efficient as possible as required. That's what we try and do.
Thanks, Nambale. And then just around, I think, Professor Sampson, you mentioned, some of the bylaws involved in terms of farmers in a municipal structure. Maybe just to give a short breakdown of that, especially if you're considering, if you've set up your alternative energy source, you either have a wind farm operating biogas, whatever you're doing as an alternative energy source, to push that into the grid. How does that work exactly? Just briefly.
In terms of the municipalities, there are some municipalities that have got regulations in place, such as the City of Cape Town, I think eThekwini Municipality and Nelson Mandela Bay. And those bylaws are mainly for small-scale embedded generation, which is basically your solar PV. So if you want to put up your solar PV on your roof, and then you still want to keep your municipality supply line and their meter, then you notify them, and then they give you guidance in terms of which inverters you must use and all that. Some of the information they have online, and then you can use those inverters. As things stand at municipality level, we don't have what we call the feed-in tariffs. So you can't fit into the grid and then get paid for that. The bylaws that are there, it's mainly for you to offset some of the power that you get from the municipality. Is also for you to go off the grid. So if you're going off the grid, for instance, with the City of Cape Town, they come and remove their meter, they remove their line that comes to your house. As soon as you're done with your installation, then they don't have anything to do with you. But if you want to just offset some of the power that you're using in your house, they don't allow you to feed back into the grid. But you can then have an inverter where during the day when you're producing your electricity, you can use your electricity in the house. If you produce more, you can't feed it into the grid, you curtail, and then you have to pay about 6,000 Rand for having that kind of a system, because when you're not producing electricity, you get electricity from the city line. At national level, though, with bigger kind of system, megawatt scale system, if you want to produce power, let's say you've got 2 megawatts or a 1 megawatt system, and then you want to wheel your power to your customer next door or your customer that's about some kilometers away, you then contact Eskom, because then you use the Eskom infrastructure for wheeling of the electricity, and then Eskom will give you a quotation. You normally pay 100,000 for that quotation, and then they'll do what they call the grid capacity study. So they look at the grid capacity in your area, and then they can tell you whether there is enough grid capacity or not. If there's no grid capacity, then Eskom will then give you a quotation to say there's no grid capacity in your area. To improve the grid capacity for you to evacuate the power that you're generating, it's going to cost you this much. And then if you agree, you go ahead and pay that money to Eskom, and then the infrastructure that is needed. If it's a substation or something like that, then they put it up. But then government immediately expropriate that infrastructure. It becomes a national asset. If somebody else wants to connect in that particular area and there's a substation that put up using your money, it's no longer a substation, it's a national government substation that's owned by government through Eskom. So Eskom can just allow whoever to connect if there's grid capacity in that particular line. That's how it works.
Thanks for that, Professor Samson. What's the ideal then for farmers in terms of options available to them? Jason, just your comments on this, and specifically to kind of think about where to over the next 5 to 10 years for a farmer listening right now.
Dawn, I think there's not really a lot of time to give all the answers. Let me give a couple of maybe scenarios which would paint a picture. At large-scale commercial farming, where farms are adjacent and they have, let's say, sensor pivots on one farm and a dairy on another farm, they can generate electricity at the dairy and then offset that on their other transformers which are running the pivots, which is offsetting and banking. That can be done through Eskom. Some of the municipalities are allowing it now as well. There's always strings attached to it, and there's a lot of loopholes you've got to jump through. But that's an example of one way of maximizing infrastructure and being able to use your generated electrons in more than one place. The other way is through wheeling. So you could generate on one farm, wheel it through to another farm, or wheel your power through to an end user somewhere else. Wheeling, for those who don't know, is a way of paying a rental fee on the electricity infrastructure. So generating power in one place and selling it to an end user in another place, and you use the electrical infrastructure that's owned by the municipality and or Eskom to then move to sell that power. That is wheeling. The other way is for a farm to start generating power on site for own consumption. So in those situations, we create systems where the farm runs either in grid parallel. So they take power from the utility and they generate their own power at the same time, and we synchronize to the grid. The other option is that the farm can run as a power island, in that they generate their own electricity, but the breaker to the utility is open. And there's different models around running that setup as well. Then on the smaller scale, it would be using the gas for purely a thermal application, which may be for heating a chicken house, maybe for boiling water or creating steam for an abattoir, something like that. And any myriad of those combinations. I think the one thing I don't want to get lost in this discussion is very specifically in terms of anaerobic digestion and biogas, is that the energy component is one of the outputs from the system, or one of the benefits from the system. If you look at the energy by itself, you will find that it's more expensive than alternative energy solutions. But if you look at it as part of a system, and that system may be converting untreated manure, you can then convert that into a nutrient-rich input into your crop, and you start calculating those benefits, and then anaerobic digestion really comes into its own. It really stands out as a solution that encompasses many aspects, not just energy.
Thanks so much, Jason, and thanks so much for just sharing that context. And just as we wrap up tonight's discussion, I think there's a lot more to be said about it, but for now, we'll end with just, final comments from our speakers, just to encourage farmers, to look at, the other alternatives available and how they should start thinking about farming more sustainably and more efficient when it comes to the energy consumption. Professor, I started with you. Maybe you can just share your last comments as we wrap up.
Thanks for having me, and I enjoyed these discussions. To the farmers, I must say, we are in the survival of the fittest kind of situation with the current ESCOM challenges that have been going on for the past 13 years or so. Don't know when these challenges will be dealt with for good, if they will ever be. I would like to encourage farmers to start looking at alternative energy sources. The initial capital investment may be a little bit steep if when you look at it, but if we look at the levelized cost of generation, you will find that you're investing in alternative energy will actually lead to a big saving, in the long run. So don't be deterred by the initial costs, but also there are systems that you can install a small one and then ramp up, such as your solar PV. If you install a bigger inverter and maybe a smaller system in terms of the kilowatt peak, you can ramp it up with time and end up with a bigger system. The only thing that we don't encourage is for you to install such kind of a system with a battery bank that you want to ramp up, because then your battery lives get affected. The same applies to your wind energy facilities, and start with smaller turbines and then ramp them up with time. But there's quite a lot of savings that you will realize in the long run. The one mistake that many people do is to install an improperly sized system, or a system that is not properly installed, not installed by the professionals. For instance, you get a solar PV system that's installed facing the wrong direction, then you don't get the maximum benefits, and in the end that creates a stigma against the technology, because you will be saying these things don't work. So rather get an expert who's got track record in terms of your system sizing, know the capabilities of your system that you've got. And that applies across the board in terms of the various technologies. If you know the capabilities and you know what benefits you can get from it, you know what you cannot do, what you can do, then it becomes a friendly system towards you. The more you become friendly by knowing how to use it, the more it becomes friendly towards you by delivering the services that you require.
Thank you, Professor Sampson. Jason, your last comments, and also how people can get in touch with you for that assessment.
I think what was just said now is very important. A lot of these systems are scalable. The most important thing is to start. So get going. Understanding some very simple, readily available numbers, which is the start. So, how many, for argument's sake, how many broilers, how many houses, what is your rotation, what is your litter volume, and that sort of thing. Putting in a system to just contain that manure and then start producing gas is the first step. Then safely burning that gas off, so that could be step one, produce the gas and flare it. Step two would then be to invest in using that gas, which may be removing the water and the sulfur from the gas and then firing burners on site. Step three may be to then start generating power and recovering the heat from the power. So that can be phased over a period of time. That really doesn't matter. The decision to start is the most important decision. The utilization of the nutrient on farm and recycling that nutrient is critical to the success, not only of the farm, but also of the system. Don't be put off by technology and not being familiar with it. If somebody can't explain it to you in a way that you can understand, find someone else to explain it to you. It can be quite daunting when people start throwing around jargon which is unfamiliar. Ask them to unpack it. Just say, I don't understand what you're talking about. What does it mean in very simple language? Don't be afraid to ask that. There's always another way to explain it. Then I'd say the next thing is references. The person you're talking to, who have they worked with before? Get a hold of people. It's all industries are small. It doesn't take long to find references and find out and get honest opinions. Is this, at the end of the day, you're going to make a decision to proceed with a company or a person? You must be absolutely certain that they can deliver what you're talking to them about and you're entrusting your money to. Those are absolutely crucial. Take the time and go and see installations. Take the time, go and see their offices or their factory. Really get comfort with what you're doing. And knowledge is out there. I mentioned earlier about Sabia, the Biogas Association. There's a lot of information there. There's a lot of information. The universities, UJ Peets have been doing a lot of work in the space. University of Venda, Stellenbosch, just about all the universities around the country, I have got some form of involvement in the biogas space and the organic space and water and reuse and so on. So there's a lot of information and get going. In terms of getting in touch with myself, the easiest is through the website, which is logicalwaste.co.za. And then that other website for the Biogas Association is sabia, sabia.org.za.
Thanks so much, Jason, and thanks so much for the practical advice. And thank you so much for being here. Nambwale, your last message for farmers specifically when it comes to irrigation and making it more efficient for farmers.
Thank you so much, Don. So I always say this, rather start small to dream big. So in other words, you start making the change by first of all, adopting that, by changing that mindset within yourself to say, I've got various number of energy sources that I can pick from. And it's just a question of, can I speak to the right expert that would be able to actually guide me on exactly which energy source would make me comfortable to actually start with that particular source with the available resource that I have. And then coupled with that now, then you have to be in touch with an expert that would be able to help you design an irrigation system that would be efficient and also in tandem with the alternative energy source that you would have picked from that point. You need all that expert advice for you to be able to actually end up having a good irrigation system, which is very efficient. Just also to mention that when you begin to think different energy sources and you also think efficient irrigation system, one thing that should always cross your mind would be irrigation systems like drip irrigation system, that where you know that your application of water is very conservative, so you not actually be losing a lot of water when it comes to your water application. And if you look at also when you couple it then with the energy source that you're going to pick from, especially when you start small, then you'll see that it actually couples in so very well. So my advice is that when you want to engage or to begin such a journey of where you're picking on different sources of energy that we've highlighted here on this platform, please make sure that you use a reputable expert that would be able to guide you correctly on that choice, and be open enough to actually even tell them further by stating exactly what would be your end use of that particular energy source that you would have picked from. Because once that is gotten correctly, you would actually be able to engage another expert that would be able to guide you or design an irrigation system that would be way efficient in tandem with the crop that you are going to grow. In terms of your best irrigation solutions that you would want to actually choose from and which are very efficient, you can always visit our website. That's www.netfm.co.za. And you would be able to engage, depending on your locality where you are, you would be able to actually meet one of our experts on the irrigation side who would be able to actually guide you through that efficient irrigation system that you need for that particular crop. And thank you so much for having me on this platform, and just wishing you all the very best in your choices that you're going to make on efficient irrigation systems.
Thank you so much, Namwale, and thank you so much, Professor Sampson. Is of course the director for the Center for Renewable and Sustainable Energy Studies at Stellenbosch University. And you can of course go to their website as well for more details on the research and all the studies that they do as well. Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you so much once again, Namwale, for this discussion. It was really fruitful and we went a bit over time, but I really enjoyed it. So thank you so much. And I definitely must say that farmers, there are a lot of options available and you definitely hold the golden ticket. So I hope that tonight's discussion was engaging enough for you. Thank you so much, guys, from me, Dawn. Have a lovely evening and all the best and everything of the best with your farming journey and getting to incorporate that alternative energy methods. Thank you so much. Bye.